Y'all ready to go through the quiz, or this is the reviews, or not the quiz yet? So I've been asking you name for generic regional. Yes. You make a guess? Abaji?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's regular trees, abaji. This one hits with most.
Traffic jam. Yeah.
Anybody remember? It's with Mosi. That's not playing the audio. This is in Moscow. I'm over here. I think I got starting here.
Yeah.
Okay. Masco Mosi. Say it back. Masco and Mosi. So Mosi again, we need three. Masco Mosi. And then I'm afraid this is just not gonna tell us, it's not playing the audio.
I just bought the truck.
Yep.
And it's just.
So this one, I'll just do the best I can.
Hitch right through. Yes.
Oops, sorry.
That's it.
Sorry. No, muted. Masco Mosi. And the new one is Kua. Kua is white one. Kua. And Kua is Coos County in New Hampshire. It is Coos County. It's actually named after the Abenaki name for white pine. Kua. Okay. I'm gonna turn this off. Did you guys have PowerPoint, or are you just gonna talk? Okay. So I'll close this out. Actually, I'm not sure if I can close that one. Okay. All right, there's a way I turn off the screen so we're not looking at blue.
We call it the tree thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Hang on with that.
You too.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You guys can go ahead. I'll shuffle with it for a moment. Unless you want me to start talking early.
Well, I think we were gonna kind of start with funding anyway. So whenever it feels like it's good to flow in for you. So from Ben's presentation today, kind of recapping all, quick recap of all of our meetings that we've had for our nursery roundtables this past year. We kind of saw some main topics kind of emerging from that. Funding being one of those. Restraints on funding, and especially now with a lot of concerns and uncertainty around funding. I guess maybe I'll just let you go with it then, and then we can start discussion after that. Yeah,
sure. Okay. So this is my best effort at talking about just sort of the basics of how these riparian restoration projects are funded. And so it's variable depending from project to project. And of course, it's ever changing, especially right now. It has gone through a lot of changes in the past as well. The state changes their priorities and their ways of doing things, and the ways that they're managing the money that they're putting out. And so all the groups have had to constantly adapt to, all the groups who are doing the implementation of these riparian projects are constantly, adapting to new funding. And so it's like it's a moving target, and you have to sort of readjust in terms of how where you look for funds and how you're writing grants and that sort of thing. My knowledge is based on being project manager for Friends of the Winooski River for about 12 years, where I was doing a lot of the grant writing and grant reporting, and so this is a lot of this is based on what I saw from that perspective. So there's probably stuff that I'm missing here, but this is what I know, and again, this is all going to be changing. So. Right now, this is sort of right now, and it's, that's all we can really talk about is what's happening right now. The way that the groups fund these, they have to write a separate grant for every single project. 10 years ago, I could write a grant that said, I'm going to plant 6 acres. I need money for 2,400 trees, and my time to organize the planting and get volunteers, or I need a site a planting crew, and it's going to cost this much, and I put it all in, and I didn't even have to mention which sites I'm going to plant at. It's just somewhere in the Winooski Basin, and that was great. But now it's such that you have to. Every single site is analyzed in terms of its benefit. So each project is now currently funded independently. And groups have to usually pull together more than one source. In some cases, you can get one grant, say from the state or woody buffer, from via WOV for woody buffer restoration, and you might be able to do just one single grant for that, but often you're pulling together more than one source. There was one project I worked on a couple of years ago. It was 11 different funding sources, and so that means 11 different grants, 11 different grant reports at the end. So that really eats into your capacity to do these projects. So usually what happens is you go out and you talk to landowners, you do some education outreach, you identify some projects, you talk to landowners, you get some that are interested, and then after that you look for funding. So project ID happens first, and then funding. And usually during the first part of the year, you're identifying those projects. Say you probably get done with the tree planting in sort of April, May, and then June, July, August or so, you're really hitting the ground trying to get those projects for the next year arranged. The first part of the year, you're stacking up the projects for the following year, and then you do grant writing in the fall, or if you're planning a fall planting, you would probably just they're sort of different in terms of when you get funding, but usually you line up funding almost like right immediately before the fall plantings, unless you really planned ahead. But so grant writing in the fall or summer. You usually don't really hear whether you've got funding for a particular project until November or so, for the following spring. You put in tree orders in December or August if you're doing a fall planting. So everything in parentheses is for fall. And then you do the planting in either April or May or October or November. So the total time from the time that you actually get a landowner to say, yeah, I want to do this, and the time and when you actually get the trees in the ground is often less than a year. So that really poses a problem in terms of we're not able to often tell nurseries we need trees until we know that we have funding, which is not until November, right before the spring planting. And I think that some communication needs to go back to the funders to say this is not really working. If we want a robust nursery production system, then we need some upfront timing, and so that it's not just the nurseries that are kind of in the dark in terms of what needs to be. What tree material is. It's the planting groups too. They don't often know what they're going to be doing until November. So it's not ideal. I apologize. This is super text heavy presentation. I didn't know there's not very many pre-pictures you can put in about funding. And it's not my favorite topic. I wish that we could just do our work and not worry about the funding. But so I apologize. It's just going to be like words. So this is just the very common funding sources that are most the ones that are most used currently. Watersheds United has a what's called Woody Buffer Block Grant, and that's money that's coming from the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC. And that so they just they have a hard time, since they've been saying, we want to manage every single grant, every single project. We want to very carefully go through and figure out whether or not it makes sense to fund this. That also makes it such that they were not able to manage all those grants. And so we would often get grants, but they couldn't sign the contract for them. And there was a backlog. And so they thought, okay, we'll give Watersheds United a block grant and they'll manage the grants for us. And that's been working well. So we write a grant to Watersheds United and they are able to manage that money that's coming in through the fees. They also have money from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and Pure Projet can use for match on those DEC grants. DEC also provides now these enhancement grants, which are for projects that might not have that nutrient reduction. So like if it's just for habitat or for flood resilience, then the enhancement grants can pay for planting of trees for cases where that argument of nutrient reduction to Lake Champlain can be made. So for planting projects outside of Lake Champlain Basin, for example, those can be funded through these enhancement grants, or ones inside the Lake Champlain Basin that don't have that nutrient reduction documentation. There's also the DEC provides formula grants, so they've got the enhancement grants and formula grants. The formula grants are just the opposite. They have where you can document nutrient reduction and have it, and it rises to the top of their list in terms of pounds of phosphorus reduced per cost per dollar that they're spending. That's how they are ranking different projects for funding. And that's through the GEC Clean Water Initiative Program, or QUIP. And those are managed by clean water service providers, or QUISPs. Those are usually the regional planning commissions for different parts of the state, but in some cases it's different organizations that have agreed to take on the management role of these grants. Again, the idea is that the DC wasn't able to do all this grant management. They didn't have enough staff. And so they've outsourced that funding or the management of those dollars. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service traditionally has provided cost share. And so almost every single project, if they have signed on and said, yes, the project that we are interested in, it has some sort of habitat value for the priority species that they're interested in, then they would provide a cost share. And that's like $250 per tree. And so most groups would probably, put together a Watersheds United Woody Buffer Block Grant with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and put those together in order to fund the project. And even though I said, you can theoretically fund your entire project through a Woody Buffer Block Grant, you write down all of, in your grant proposal, you say, here's all of the funding that I need. Often WUG would come back to you and say, well, we would like to, stretch the dollars that we have. So can you partner with U.S. Fish and Wildlife? Have you reached out to them? Would you be willing to get some Pure Projet money if you have to do a little bit more grant reporting, that sort of. They have that National Fish and Wildlife Foundation money that's for like brook trout habitat, and so they try to sort of negotiate and help tie all that money together. So it ends up being, starts to get kind of complicated, a web of different funding coming in, and then the reporting that is required for that. And then some groups also do what they call CREP projects. So the CREP is Conservation and Reserve Enhancement Program. This is a program run by the through USDA Farm Service Agency or NRCS, National. Yeah, thank you. I'm so used to saying NRCS or CREP, then I started thinking, what does CREP mean? But most people would just say NRCS CREP and not worry about everybody loves their acronyms. So the CREP program is for ag or forested land only, so it has to be in current ag production, and landowners get an incentive to take that land out of production and put in a riparian buffer. Or there's lots of other practices too they're part of this. So exclusion of livestock from streams and that sort of. So it's a great program. One problem is that because it's USDA Farm Services, it depends on the Farm Bill. So there has to be an act. There has to be either a continuing resolution or an actual budget passed by Congress in order to have funding for this. And it's often contentious. There's lots of controversy about nutrition regulations and that sort of thing that sometimes stall the Farm Bill. So the CREP program requires that Farm Bill, and so it ebbs and flows, and it can be as much as 50% of the trees planted in a particular year might be CREP. But if the Farm Bill is not active, then the CREP isn't being spent, and so that's I think that's Ben was talking earlier about the fluctuation. Last year there wasn't as many trees, and I wonder if that partly is because the CREP program has been kind of in a lull because there was no active Farm Bill for a while. So those are the common sources. CREP is often done by, that's often managed by the conservation districts as opposed to some of the watershed nonprofit organizations. Not always, so some watershed groups that also do CREP. They work with the Vermont Agency of Ag to implement those projects. The ones that are in yellow are ones that I know of that have direct federal funding involved. So the ones that are probably a little more shaky right now in terms of the funding, as Chris Smith mentioned, a lot of their funding is on pause right now. So and places like National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they are semi-federal. So they have some funding that is from private donations, but they also have a lot of EPA funding, USDA funding. And so they're also going to be susceptible to any changes in federal funding. I changed the color just to make it wake you up. All these words. So there's also additional funding for riparian restoration that's available through Lake Champlain Basin Program. They have a Clean Water and Healthy Ecosystems grant. It's a yearly grant. And again, it's, that one does allow you to, you could list, say, in the past, I've listed multiple projects in one, but I really have to sort of describe each project and package them up in that way. Lake Champlain Basin Program gets money from PA. So another case where there's some federal funding involved. There's a watershed grant that Vermont Fish and Wildlife also offers. It's not a lot of money, but it's another case, another source of funding that some groups can use, and that's also project dependent. You have to write about the specific project that you're doing. Again, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, in addition to the money that they provide through WOV, they have this Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund and others that some groups are tapping into for riparian work. I currently have a grant to work with Audubon and a couple of the watershed groups and a conservation district to to tweak riparian buffer process, the actual planting, how we're doing it, and the species that we're using specifically for habitat. So birds and in particular. And then there's other nonprofit organizations, private foundations that some groups will look to provide funding. So that's all the words. I finally got to show you the picture. Not that this means anything. I just thought it was cool that I had a bunch of volunteers that very carefully lined up all of their shovels after planting. Or they were actually, I think they're off to lunch. You can see them going off to the roofs and go, sit and enjoy lunch. But I tried to go fast because it's not very interesting, but I hope that wasn't, just give you an idea of where that funding is coming. Any question? Yeah.
Can you say anything about the ratio of funding from those different sources? Like you sort of alluded to the fact that losing crep is a big deal in a given year.
Yeah.
Like, could you rank them in terms of how big an impact in the world they have?
I really should collect that information, and I have been, trying to at least sort of get a tree count for, different groups, and that's why I say it's about 50%. Is because in the past, like 2023, is the last that I have really good data for, and it was crep was, I think actually that year is like 30%. But I don't know if they did any projects less. So anybody know?
Did you say for crab?
Crep? Yeah, I did. Yeah, okay. Because it was on hiatus for a little while, and in which case they're able to talk to people and kind of, but they're and talk to landowners, but they can't actually do the implementation when it's on. So, yeah.
Kind of under the impression that most of this stuff is for nonprofit only. I know that we got some funding through Lake Champlain Basin that was open to for-profit businesses. Is that the case? There's.
I think that all of the funding for the actual implementation of the riparian projects, you need a nonprofit partner. So I know Red Start often would do some of the project development, like they would find somebody who was interested in planting trees and then reach out to Friends of the Winooski to partner with them. And we would write the grant, and they would maybe provide some matching funds. They might have, some private donors or something that they would, or maybe the landowner themselves would put in some money, and then we could piece together something. But I don't think that there's any funding that's available straight to nonprofits to do the implementation of a riparian restoration.
Do all of those sources cover both stems and implementation, or do some have differences in what they cover?
Yeah, the only one that's just for trees is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Partners for Fish and Wildlife and their Trees for Streams programs are just cost share for trees. Okay. They don't cover anything. They in terms of staff time, although they often they can kick in if they have the capacity, some site prep work or site maintenance. Sometimes they've got certified pesticide application people that they can. So if they're partnering on a project, they could say, well, we'll give you this money for trees, but we'll also we would like to do some site prep before we put them in. But they don't. It doesn't funnel through the money for that doesn't funnel through the organization that's sort of the lead on the project.
It's the last year for the pure nursery fund.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. Yeah. That's why that was in parentheses. I forgot to mention. Yeah, that. Pure Projet is pulling out of their Vermont projects, unfortunately.
Like there's just conscious.
But they did offer, they required extra, you have to go back and monitor and you had to prove that you had 80% survivorship and that sort of thing. So it was an extra lift to do for Pure Projet.
Do you know any, or if any of those funding sources are interested in funding projects adjacent to tree planting, like upstream development of nurseries, for instance.
Yeah, well, Lake Champlain Basin Program has that nursery support grant that was open, has been open in the past, that again, it's open this year. And who else was saying that, somebody earlier this morning was talking about that too, that we need, that maybe just telling the state, that, we need to communicate to the state that the nurseries need, need support. If we really want, a good survivorship and quality restoration projects, that we need to be supporting the nurseries.
I would just add another source of nursery funding. I run a nursery through a conservation district, and our primary grant is from the Great Lakes Fisheries Committee through the Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Could a for-profit go for that as well?
I don't know. That is a good question. I think the conservation districts being like kind of a quasi nonprofit, quasi like municipal government, they're kind of in a unique situation, but definitely worth an ask.
Yeah, one thing I think about too, Dave, like with those funding sources, even if they're not for, for profit nurseries, they're for getting more trees on landscape, and there's, planting groups that exist to do it. That means more trees are needed. Right. And so it's like finding other hurdles to getting those projects, funded. And then hopefully if we get more projects funded, those are going to flow into the need of the nursery.
And I would say too, that there's always the opportunity to partner with a nonprofit. There's ways to sort of finagle things, that the nonprofit, there's people do all kinds of things like, a for-profit person could write a grant and then ask a nonprofit to submit it, or propose to a nonprofit, here's what I would like to see done. I think this is a good thing that's not just benefiting me, but the planting community as a whole. What do you think? Can you partner with that? And that includes me. If I have written and managed grants, and I have currently managing a grant. So my role at UVM allows me to help with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hi, Megan from Lakes Commons. We have partnered with a number of for-profit organizations who are interested in submitting grants for tree planting. So we're out here if you're interested in planting trees. And we're also hiring.
Thanks, Megan.
Have you heard anything about this next round of nursery support grant money through Lake Champlain Basin?
Yeah, it's open. That grant is open.
No, I mean the last round was frozen, unfrozen, kind of frozen.
I did, yes.
I was just curious.
Thanks for asking that question, because as of last week, they said we're good to go.
Okay.
No problems.
I was just
go ahead and go ahead and submit those grants, and we think we're okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I wanted to. I was just here. Before that, they said, hold on, wait, we don't know, and then they said, so they changed. Then they changed it. So I think it's fine.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was great, Sean. I think in a way, just to show a lot of us nurseries here, like where planting groups are coming from and how they're gaining that funding in order to buy the trees. So I guess just opening up a little bit, other than what Sean mentioned, are there any other planters in here that like get funding from other sources, or anything that she didn't mention that it would be good for nurseries to know about? In the whole step-by-step process of how we end up getting trees in the ground. Is there anyone that uses alternative? Yeah.
Maybe I can say something. I work for the Agency of Transportation, and may or may not know that we, when we repair bridges or culverts, we also, certain projects will put in riparian planting plans. So I think we planted 9 or 10 sites last year, and traditionally large contractors bid on the projects, and they hire a subcontractor, which tends to be a landscaper. And then they try to get the material, and I try to specify small container native plants, and often I'm getting things back that are like cultivars that they got from, out of state, and I'm like, so I think it might come down to educating some of I don't know, what do you all think? But I want them to learn about you and what you do, because that's the type of thing that we're looking for on our projects. So any ideas would be helpful. I can't control who gets the bid, obviously, but like we can educate contractors.
Would
There are other student projects.
that fall under the new guidelines that were talked about earlier?
No, we have our own, we have a riparian planting toolkit that kind of like outlines species and a lower flexible species, I would say, if they're grown in Vermont, they're like. Yeah.
Would it be helpful to you if there was like a list of nurseries that you could suggest that landscapers buy from?
It would be. Is that a thing we could check?
There's a lot of sites that have a lot of lists.
Yeah.
I have my own opinions about that just because there's a lot of range of quality, or not, I won't say quality, but types of product that maybe it's native, but not locally sourced, or maybe it's not even, cultivar, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of just like information overload of just looking at list over list over list. So I don't necessarily know what the solution is there, if it's like a map or something, but that's something I feel like Grow Wild has tried to, attempt. I keep saying attempt, but they have done that. So there's a lot of different organizations that have created lists that we could probably pull from as well. But looking at like conservation grade sort of product, I think is a little bit different and each organization kind of looks at it differently. So I guess do you have anything?
I mean, when,
I'm gonna basically move over here, I'm looking at the screen.
Oh.
You're off. Yeah, well, I guess even now your heads are up.
They stand in the middle.
The recording is under.
Stand on the table.
At least they'll know that there's a body there.
You guys want chairs to sit?
On that note, I know that there's the sort of efforts to perhaps, like for perennials to have some sort of certification process. There's been sort of this idea that they're not only certified native, but maybe even local ecotype or if not a cultivar, so that like people who are going into a nursery would actually be able to buy something that they know is not, from genetics from California, or that it's that's a cultivar rather than an actual native. And I don't know if that would, that this is long term, but maybe there could be some sort of certification, and you could say certified, nursery, local native nursery. I don't know, something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think tracking the sourcing is important. Just knowing not just that it's a native species, but where it came from is important. But I guess any other comments on funding that anyone else is? Yes.
Sorry, one more comment that came to mind about for-profit nursery funding. I used to work with Red Start, who's a for-profit that had restoration nursery, and they got a couple big grants through the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, specifically their business enhancement grants for like large equipment purchases. So that's definitely another avenue.
Thanks. Yeah, I forgot to include it.
I'm just curious, I think a lot of this is like, Vermont centric, and I'm curious if there's anyone else out of state from here in this room, or, which is fine, but I just was curious if that could maybe be like another connection or another piece that could be brought in.
Yeah, I should have apologized for that initially. And yeah, we definitely need to incorporate that. I would love to know more about what the funding looks like in New York. And I know that the Nature Conservancy in New York has this huge effort to plant, whatever it is, 25, 35 million trees. And Mandy St. Clair's, I don't know if you're in touch with her at all about that. So there's a ton, yeah, they're wanting to plant tons and tons of trees. And they are sourcing not only from New York, but also Vermont for those. So that's another source, another place where there's this huge demand.
Yeah, because sometimes I think we're even eligible in New York for some of the Vermont funding, just because we're part of the Lake Champlain.
Right, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and so maybe that goes vice versa too. Maybe there's some things in like other states that we would all be eligible for, and we don't know about.
Yeah. I'll work on that. That's one thing that I you know, this past year, I've been kicking myself that I haven't been learning more about the New York side.
And I think next thing we were kind of thinking about, given the uncertainty in the federal sphere, opening it up a little bit to how ways that we can like better support each other through that. What that looks like necessarily, maybe Ben can speak a little bit more on that, at least on the ICN side of things.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, a lot of the discussion that's come out of these roundtables is kind of like dreaming how the Intervale can be that resource. And I think that, you know, we've kind of presented a bunch of different ideas, but I guess I'm curious to open up like, what are some ways as we enter into 2025 that you imagine that there's the way that the ICN can, you know, support you with your operations or support you getting that funding of those plans?
So I'd say you guys are doing a good job. You know, Brooke, your position as a seed coordinator, for me has been insanely helpful to have somebody who's, you know, able to help source for, you know, source seeds and process them, stuff like that. That's an incredible resource. You know, also just having you guys able to do starts too of the. I mean, really, you're like the only source for local genetics, unless someone wants to go harvest them themselves.
Do you think that's like a marketable thing that you can use?
It would seem that is a highly marketable thing. Yeah. Like if I wanna, yeah, you guys are the only place that I could go and ask somebody for Vermont source genetics. I don't know anybody else. You know, there's a few other small, just getting off the ground operations, but I think a lot of us are in the same shoes. We're just tiny, and you know, if you're looking to expand, there's only so much you can do with a small operation. You know full well what it takes to go source seeds and find them, and either at the right time and then processing them is a whole other thing, and then starting them is a whole other thing. Like it's a lot. There's a lot to producing plants. So just having you guys as a resource to help be a couple, you know, take a couple of those steps. Huge, I think. Good job.
I just want to shout out that Northwood Stewardship Center is actually like really pivotal to the amount of seed that we're able to collect, and there's a bunch of them in the room right now. So just want to like thank you guys for all the work you do in scouting and collecting and cleaning, storage. It's been an awesome partnership. So thank you guys. And, you know, it'd be interesting to see how that partnership grows and expands over the next few years.
Yeah,
Totally.
and it's like definitely like phase one of the riparian lands native seed partnership, and it's exciting to think about like what that could look like. You know, is that all like, is the Intervale stamp always going to exist within that partnership, or is it going to be like its own thing? And that's like that certificate of approval that, you know, you have seeds that were collected by the riparian lands native seed partnership or something.
I think Intervale and Northwoods have been really awesome partners for our nursery, both in sourcing seeds, starts, technical assistance, you know, showing me seed collection techniques and sites, and like really generous with your time and knowledge. Thank you, my friend.
Is that one of the main hurdles is just getting seeds and propagating them? That's like the main area of support that is needed, do you think?
At the moment, yeah, because our shoot is we're trying to build. So like, our problem is not yet having an inventory that we can't get rid of. That may become the bigger issue in a few years, and maybe that's where that tree hub idea really could, become something that we need more. But at the moment, it's just building up inventory, and that anyone who grows knows that takes time.
Yeah.
I'm curious of the nurseries in the room, whether everybody is intending to start from seed or whether people are more focused on working with seedlings or plugs or something and growing up to size from that. Anyone can speak to that.
I mean, it's a combination for us. Yeah, I mean, we've done some seeding this year. Last year was a lot of dormant cuttings. Direct into the field, some plug trays. Like we're trying a few different things right now, but it seems like there's a better fit for some species, certain paths. So kind of spreading it out a bit. But also like up until, I mean, and all of you had collected seed last year, but it seemed like this year there seemed, and maybe we're just more involved at this point, but it seemed like there was a lot more stock kind of available for dispersal. And so that opened it up a lot for us. Whereas, last year we collected things when we could and when we happened to be there at the right time. But like, there's just so many things on the plate. It's hard to like devote the time to like go, potentially maybe get some seeds somewhere. Like it's hard to step away from the production side to go that time. But
I will just say too, the number that Ben presented, that was the past 2 years. It wasn't. So over 2 years, we collected that much.
That's awesome.
Which is still a lot, but and yeah, that's mainly thanks to Jess and Jake and Leah who are all here. Yeah, so I also want to throw out there too, I think most everyone, or at least the nurseries, know that seeds are provided now from our partnership at no cost to conservation nurseries. So if you work with conservation nurseries specifically, let them know because we can give them seed that they need. And kind of start this whole process over the next 2 to 3 years of getting trees to people. So, any other comments on, that was kind of funding specific, I guess?
Well, yeah, I'm curious, I know we've gotten a lot of plans for the seeds to folks, but how are you doing with your nurseries on sales? Like, do you think that those markets exist and you're having success there?
yeah.
Little, for us, a little early to tell.
Yeah.
Part of our grant that we got through Lake Champlain Basin program is our first round of production, and essentially, they're facilitating us producing it, so we're going to give it at no cost to nonprofits, municipalities that are doing habitat restoration projects. So it's a little hard to say, it's easier to give away plants than to sell them. So we got a really good response on the plants that were free, but I don't know what that will translate to afterwards. We're really hoping that that's just like the building block, stepping stone to getting a relationship and so on and so forth. But it's kind of early for us to tell. We're also going to explore the retail market this year, do some pre-order, pre-approved stuff, but that's also too early to tell. We just barely put out that order form earlier this week, so we don't really know yet.
Does the idea of Unionville being a centralized hub to access those larger markets sound like it could be useful in the future? Claire?
I would say right now at our scale, I actually just sold all of the trees that we have in the ground to one partner. But as we expand, I think the tree hub is a good idea. I also think I don't know how this works, but like if your sales and inventory software is like something that is like transferable or like a product that you could sell, like I could see that being super duper useful so that we're not all emailing around like these spreadsheets
Yeah,
in the future.
yeah. I don't know the answer to that right now, but I think that's what you want.
I'm like not, I'm a, dirt person, not like a software.
Megan?
Yeah. There's an answer to that, actually. So we order a phenomenal amount of fruiting trees, and we don't go to, 10,000 nurseries. We generally go to one who sources all of the materials for us through their allocation system. So I should put you in touch then with that person. I'm sure it's not a cheap thing, but it's something that could be grant funded. So, I place an order, Nick places an order, whomever places an order, it comes into your system, and then it gets dispersed to the individual nurseries.
Interesting.
Yeah, it exists, it's out there, and we use it, and I use it a lot.
So it's not so much of that place buying in the trees from all these nurseries, it's just a connector to all the different.
It's you become the hub for the Interlace Commons says, I need 10,000 dogwoods and I need 10,000 alders, and you can put it out to the nurseries and aggregate all of those orders in one place.
Cool.
It exists.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense when you're looking at like the scales of the nurseries in our area. Like we don't have Midwest landscapes. And like land especially is like a very big hurdle as we own. So the idea of like relying solely on one nursery to like grow to a size to accommodate these huge orders, that like it's probably not realistic. But like if one central spot can be tagged, like Megan's saying, to aggregate all of those, and all that person who's ordering has to do is like hit the button, then like that becomes, I see, more viable. Kind of in the way that like the food hub, was doing it when they were doing that. But so it's easier to aggregate from lots of different people and get together. It's kind of all we need.
One piece then, like when we're talking about the hub and we're having this same conversation about local genetics, sourcing, like tracking all of that, like is that something that you're building into your software so that like, like if Megan is saying like, one person or one place could, kind of get all these orders together, how do you then track, like, say I'm ordering from the High Peaks in New York and I want something as like genetically similar to that area? Is that something that like you can build into that software system?
Potentially, we can build this into our software, right? At the way it is right now, the way we're organizing it in the software is whether it was grown at the Intervale or if it was not grown at the Intervale. Brooke and I visited the Sami nursery this fall and got the advice to not incorporate your seed software with your tree software. I don't know if you want to talk a little more about,
Yeah, I mean, even in our field, it's just kind of difficult to track sourcing once it's out in the field. Christine and I have started working together on tracking sourcing into the greenhouse, knowing the accession and knowing the source into the greenhouse. But once it goes out into the field, it kind of gets all mixed up. It's one species in a row, but it could be from like 5 different sources. So how we end up doing that is still kind of up in the air. So even with that, I guess for other nurseries, smaller nurseries could probably track it easier and know that and just like share that information wherever this software ends up. But I think we're still kind of trying to figure out in our field what the reality of that is. If it's just like a bunch of flags segmenting the row, like this seed zone, this is this seed zone. Yeah, and how to follow that through is still,
I think it's definitely like in that dream category right now. Like that would be really cool if we had that potential to do that. And hopefully that's going to present itself as we build out the software. Yeah.
I would think that's really important, especially listening to Tony's models.
Yeah.
You need to know seed source, especially if we're talking about doing ecological planning, climate future, that would be really important. So from the guy you're not collecting up in the southern or south yet, that would be a group that you probably want to separate out if you're covering.
Right.
Yeah. And then we even like, have the idea of like, maybe there's another nursery in the south that's only working with the southern trees. And we're kind of like, coordinating with that nursery, but not sharing the plants between the two.
Yeah, have you talked much with Helene?
Not since the last time.
Yeah, because I know that they also are interested in maybe being a hub,
Mhm.
and maybe they could be the southern,
Totally.
complement.
Right.
I feel like that would almost be easier. And the idea of having to categorize like each tray that you put into a field.
Mhm.
I mean, if we were dealing with like, $100 stem, cool, but
Right.
it's not that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it seems like a big barrier to any sort of productivity.
Yeah, but there's essentially like what? How many? 5 seed zones? 4, basically 4 seed zones in
Or in
Vermont,
Vermont.
and then another in New York. They're at least in that Lake Champlain Basin. There's a couple more. Oh, and so it's not like it's
It's not
and it's not somebody's really doing like the red spruce level genetics. It seems like if at least at first all we're doing is the different seed zones, then I would think it's not. I mean, it's not completely outside the realm of possibility.
No,
I don't know.
No, it's not.
But yeah, you can imagine that there's, the northern nurseries do the 2 northern seed zones and the southern, the 2 southern, something like that, at least within Vermont.
Yeah, all of the seeds that we collect are tracked in that way. It's just, up to the nurseries how to follow through with that. And I guess it just depends on availability. We're not always, like Murray said, in southern Vermont, we're not getting seeds there. So if there's a nursery there, they don't have seeds. So that's something that obviously like the seed project needs to work on. But yeah, the availability from species to species, like Jess and her crew are able to get a ton of balsam fir or whatever it is that I don't get balsam fir over here, like ever. So if someone over here wanted balsam fir, it wouldn't really match to what we have available, I guess. So there's like some things there as well. I think ideally it'd be amazing. Jess and I talk about the dream state all the time of like, if we had collection crews in every seed zone and there was a nursery to match with all of our collections in that seed zone, like that would be the dream. But we need money to do that we don't have right now. So I mean, that's ideal, but I'm kind of rambling now. Do we want to move on to communication? So I think there's kind of 4 main things. We want to talk about funding, communications, availability, and maybe capacity. Restraints, those seem to be kind of like the main topics that we kind of noticed emerge from our roundtables. So just talking about the roundtables themselves for people who have like attended them previously, have they been helpful? What do we need to do more? Like, what can we get more out of it during these roundtables? Getting some feedback there, like wins and losses in that realm. What can we do better? All of that. Clara?
I was gonna say, this is like kind of a maybe not too like ambitious idea, but I was thinking like, I would love to just like spend more time like having these discussions, but like at nurseries, like, I don't know, obviously like, especially during the growing season, it's hard to go places. It's also hard to host a bunch of people. But I think it would be really cool to continue to have these conversations, but like also in the context of like people, actually showing like, this is our infrastructure, this is our land base, this is our setup. Like,
Let's do that. That's-
I think that would
I
be,
think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
and I know nobody wants to come to Ferdinand. But we would be happy to. David, you have
Yeah,
something?
well, I'll second that. You know, I've been to visit you guys a few times, and you guys came to visit us this past year. And those are really helpful because like you said, you see the stuff, you're on the ground, it's more inspiring, you know. Think of more things when you're actually looking at it than, you know, sitting in a room thinking about it. And it's just really nice to see how other people are doing it. Sometimes it's just the little things you don't think about, and then you see, and you're like, oh, why wasn't I doing that? Of course, like it makes more sense. But yeah, but I would say the roundtables have been really good so far. It's really nice to chat with people and hear what's going on. I think one potential downside if you keep rehashing the same things over and over and not making any progress on it, then it'll start to become repetitive. But we're not there yet, you know. I'm not saying that that's how I feel about it, but I think that, you know, it's so far it's been good. Like I'm actually really surprised, not surprised, but like, I'm really glad. It seems like you guys are doing stuff, moving forward with these, the idea of the round table or the hub. Seems like they're thinking about this and keep pushing it. So it's really cool to see. Yeah, it feels like it's nice to have a community that's just working in the same direction.
Yeah, that's real. Because the topics do kind of stay the same, and if we're kind of just like spinning our wheels a little bit, it could, yeah, I could see it happening if we're not able to get traction in certain areas. And it's so true. Yeah, like ideas and questions just flow a lot more easier when you are at a nursery and looking at what everyone has going on. And it's just cool to see how everyone approaches the same thing a little bit differently, which is really nice. Yeah.
I love the idea of visiting nurseries. That sounds great. Two things I wanted to mention. One is a thing I felt and noticed in the roundtables are that there are people in the room who are being paid to be there, and then there are the for-profit startup businesses who are not being paid to be there, and that's. I think we need to just be really aware of that, and if we can find a source of funding to provide stipends, because the feedback and the perspective of the for-profit nurseries that are working through this, that feedback's really important. And to Peter's point, like at some point there may be diminishing returns and even less of a reason for them to be there. So I think that's one important dimension we should consider. Another is I think that there's a lot unspoken about shared values and shared attributes of these products. And like if we think about a tree hub being like an aggregator and marketer of many businesses' products, I think probably getting on the same page about what are those attributes of that product before one person is standing up or one organization is standing up and selling it on behalf of others. You know, like for instance, are we talking about organic practices? Like what does it mean to be a conservation nursery? Can a nursery that supplies the conservation market also supply other markets? And is everyone okay with like side-by-side production practices that could not match completely, but for different markets? I think a lot of that stuff needs to be hashed out.
I agree with that. And I also think that like one thing that I think would be helpful right now in this moment is I think a lot of nurseries have different strengths that we all have, you know, like whether it's land, whether it's like access to greenhouse, for profit, nonprofit. So I think maybe like either identifying, you know, like each nursery's like top strengths or places of weaknesses and being able to draw lines between nurseries of like direct markets, like, oh, I have, you know, a shit ton of greenhouse space, but I'm farming on top of a mountain in the Adirondacks. Like, how do I like basically, where can I step in and like help somebody out with, you know, what I have to offer and like vice versa. So maybe like identifying like where there are direct lines that we can be connecting right now with like this room to make it like a little bit of a stronger network. And then that can also like extend beyond that too.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I'll just offer too that I found the nursery roundtables really informative for me, so that I know what y'all are going through and what your needs are, and so that I can, you know, hopefully, you know, now that I've got my feet on the ground a little bit with this new position, that I can really start to advocate more for, you know, for support. And so it was, you know, it was nice for me, you know, I've just communicated with Lake Champlain Basin Program about the nursery and support grant. And, you know, so it might not seem like there's actual things happening with the roundtable, but there are. I mean, there's information that's flowing that wasn't flowing before. Yeah, so I find that they've been beneficial from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you for hosting and coordinating. Yeah.
For any planters in the room and for nurseries on both sides, what do you think, like communications wise, what needs to be better between growers and planters? Like what is going to bridge that gap? What would help? Is it having more frequent meetings? I know that's like a really hard thing to pitch, especially during busier seasons. We have that growers listserv that Sean started this past year, that's sharing information between growers, that people that aren't growing can kind of like sneak peek on what's going on. But yeah, what would be helpful to kind of keep that communication flowing, so that maybe we don't have to have these contract grows that we've kind of talked about before, but having more handshake agreements. Not even promising that, but like what is going to get us to a point where it flows more seamlessly from getting a seed in hand to growing it and planting it in the ground. Yeah.
I think that I love doing the in-person meetings. I think they're great, but I think everyone lives very far away. And so I think that if we had like, you know, multiple longer in-person meetings where we like really take a deep dive and like kind of hash out some of the things we're talking about, but then maybe if we had a little bit more frequent like online 1-hour meetings, even during the season, where like we can either like pick one topic and like have a brainstorm stash or like anything like that, maybe like doing like it would be a smaller bite basically, and but maybe on a more frequent level, so that like in real time, we can like talk about things that are happening or anything like that, or like seeds or climate or drought or whatever's going on. So maybe like having more frequent meetings, but less of a commitment to traveling and time and all of that.
Right. Yeah.
But I like the in-person stuff, so I don't want to get rid of that, but.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just like quick, like let's talk about something that like we're dealing with in our field right now that maybe we need a little bit of help with. Or online, and then yeah, having longer strategy sessions in person. Spencer.
One thing that makes me a little nervous is that all of these new nurseries are coming online at the same time, and potential decline in number of trees that are being planted in the next couple of years. And I think it'd be cool if there was some way to like the planters could fill out surveys that sort of touched on what their needs are for the next couple of years, what if they just hired 5 new crews, or if they are scaling back because they don't have funding, just like a little bit more forward-looking 2-3 years out, so that, and from the nursery perspective, maybe nurseries just double their willow production and want to like make that information available so that we're not all jumping at something that doesn't actually exist. Or
Yeah, and I know that maybe that's something that we communicate too, because I know what we've done in the past is say, hey, like, this is what we grow really well in our field. This is what we're gonna buy from the Midwest next year to fill out our diversity. who can fill those gaps? Maybe that's what we do next year is just see how many of those species can get knocked off the Midwest border and and they get preserved by partner nurseries or something. And I can also share that out. We have that information now, and it will probably look about the same for next year.
I already know this, but there's like a parallel happening with seed for grass and forbs. And on like there's a Northeast network that's like having these same conversations about how they can fulfill large like pollinator seed orders and things. So I don't know if you're already connected with them, but they're also talking about a hub and like trying to figure out how you support multiple businesses under one umbrella. And I don't know. It was.
Yeah, I am on that hub.
You are.
Yeah, so we're pretty early stages, at least for this, like, we're calling it the Northern Appalachian Atlantic Maritime Hub, which is really long, but we didn't know what else to call it. So, yeah. But yeah, I think that is part of it, filling those needs across a lot of these ecoregions, because we don't really necessarily collect grasses and herbaceous plants in general, but yeah, wherever that crosses over, we're still really trying to figure that out. Since at least for the seed partnership, we're not turning it into like an enterprise necessarily. It's more just a service that we're offering to nurseries based on just ecological service and not making a business out of it. And I think that's kind of where we're headed with the Northern Appalachian Hub as well. Just getting seeds out in the landscape, that's like our main priority. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think something that would also be helpful that's come up a lot is species selection between planters and nursery growers. There are some like consistent species, across the board, like the workhorse ones, quote unquote, that everyone wants. But like, I think communication wise, if you're getting like a sense of a shift, like there's one species that like we know we may need a lot of for this specific site that would look really good for that site because it's really present there or whatever reason. Like that's something really good to know as a nursery because the hot species has been nannyberry the last year or so. And so that's just something really good to know because we don't really grow nannyberry. Partially because we can't, but yeah. Any thoughts there on species selection as well? Are people seeing pretty consistent, like year after year, our planting projects? We have these 10 species that we work with, and that's pretty much it. Or it kind of, I realize it kind of varies by site as well, but.
It seems like, in my experience, it's sort of the same handful of species that we really like. And they almost always have more to do with how well they survive after planting. That we just want to get that structure on the ground. And so and anything that, like stuff that could spread, like balsam poplar, and, that's really nice. It feels like you get more than one tree for or speckled alder. So it's, then you find out that, for wild basswood does really well, and then you find out that the deer have all of a sudden developed a taste for basswood that they didn't touch before. So that's why there's this sort of, like Manu calls the species du jour.
Yeah. And
so, I think but knowing, having some more of that feedback, like, oh, we're not going to be doing any more, if nannyberry becomes the next favorite deer food, the growers need to communicate that back.
How are we doing time?
It is like 20 after, so we've got 10, 12 more minutes.
I think the next one was availability, and I think that maybe you want to mention, we talked about, for this food hub,
Tree.
yeah, tree hub, what we could offer, do you want to speak on that?
It's great.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think like just generally like something to think about. If we are exploring this world of just buying in from our partner nurseries, like back the napkin math, like $5 a stem for 2 to 4 foot stems is kind of like our price point for what we could buy from them. And that's kind of what we're looking at for 2026. So. Yeah.
Well, just looping back to the conversation that you, Daniel, and I had, that we really should put together some type of grant to look at the economics of these nurseries at different scales, whether it's half acre, acre, 5 acre, because, as I've said before, I mean, 5% of my planting stock comes from Vermont, and I'm not paying $5 a stem, which is the power of cooperative growing. So it's just something that really needs to be sussed out.
Is when you are planning those projects, is it the price per stem, is that considered when you're writing the grant applications to get those projects funded?
Say that one more time.
When you're doing these projects and you're getting the $2 stems from wherever, are you pricing out the cost of those projects and applying for those grants with the stem cost considered? Or is it kind of like you get the funding and you're like, okay, I can make it work with the Midwest?
Yeah. That.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is, back to what Daniel said, is like, how's our value set aligned? With these funders, I can say, look, these are $5 stem trees. That's the amount of money I need per stem. So there's just two competing things going on, because most of my conservation projects, I can't afford. My clients are unwilling to pay $5 a stem. That doesn't mean, so I think there's a conversation there that oh, these nurseries are trying to make a livable wage. This is their livelihood strategy. We need to pay them better than $1 a stem.
Right.
Yeah. I think looking at the different scales to help us identify, at a half acre scale, what can we produce? And these numbers exist in the world. So does that make sense? Yeah, because I don't think we have a good handle on that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that's going to be one of these outcomes of this new inventory software, is we're really going to be able to evaluate what our cost of production is. And hopefully within a year's time, we're going to kind of nail down what it actually costs to grow a tree. Yeah.
Have you considered maybe a range of around $5, with $5 as the average, just given the challenges associated with growing certain species?
Yeah, and that's going to be another, possible outcome of this. Right now, our 2 to 4 stems, no matter what the species, are all the exact same price. And
What you sell them on for, you mean?
yeah, what their cost is, what the price of it is. Even though some of our, kind of oaks take a really long time to grow. And when we realize, when we figure out how much it actually costs to grow some of these trees, we might be able to have that information so we can price them differently.
Yeah, and the back end version of that question is if you're supplying seedlings, trays of seedlings to people to grow out in the field, is there some price variability there based on how much effort you've put into getting it to? Yeah,
and I mean, they all the seeds have different stratification requirements. Some of them take 2 years, and right now that's our only thing is if it takes 1 year, it's $200. If it takes 2 years, it's $400. And it's kind of just considering the utilities in the greenhouse and the water. Yeah.
Just to change the subject for a second, but it'd be cool if this future tree hub could expand beyond riparian plantings, and some of the talks today about upland forest species that I don't know where I would go to get some of those species
Presentation.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm curious in this room, I mean, like that, you know, different values is a huge piece, especially when you have these different businesses and organizations. I mean, like, you know, I'm curious if there's other growers in this room that are supporting their businesses by growing things besides conservation and rated species. Yeah. And yeah, this is like a discussion that I know is like circling around our team for sure. You know, the Annabelle Conservation Nurseries are part of a food organization, and we have all this infrastructure to grow trees. Should we be growing fruit trees?
Yeah, let me just say this again. Like, I order 5% of my trees from the state of Vermont, from nurseries in Vermont. I had 27,000 stems to plant this year, some of which are going in Vermont landscapes. Most of them are not conservation species. We could contract with a lot of you in this room, right? Like, so I would say if you can make that happen, we can give you a list of plants that you can grow. And so we'll talk about that next presentation, but I wouldn't limit yourself to conservation species because there is, setting aside the frozen grants right now, there is an unsurmountable amount of funding for agroforestry right now moving to the state of Vermont. You can't imagine how much. I'll tell you next.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into that conversation.
One thing, just going back to that feeling, and obviously I work with the state, so I'm not like a business person, but what I see is that if a landscape contractor tries to find a plant, they're going to mark it up and charge, you know, the client, so me, or the state. They're going to charge more than what the cost of the plant material is. So maybe for certain, I don't know, for certain types of businesses that buy from you, you could mark it up more so that you're benefiting from, it's just, I don't know.
I think like another way to like think about that is like we've considered the idea of like subsidizing trees instead of like just marking up, you know, from different buyers, I guess, in an effort to try to like expand our impact.
Yeah, I was thinking you could make some money on one type of job, and then that could support your like awesome other.
And essentially that is what's happening right now with our tree species, because, you know, it's really, really cheap to grow the willows, but they're priced higher than they actually cost. And that way we can keep our red oaks down.
Yeah.
So.
One other just brief comment about the upland trees, and that is that in the other room, Ben Davis is talking about how groups should be doing planting along smaller streams, not just looking at you know, big river corridors and planting on big, you know, floodplain areas, but actually, you know, prioritizing even work on very, very small streams, in which case they would probably need more of the upland species.
What an awesome group.
I'm just thinking about that price comment. I'm not from a nursery background, I'm just listening. But I'm wondering if you thought about like pay what you can model, because I can see, like you just mentioned, like a recommended price for like the business sector.
Right.
To pay, I'm just going with the $5, you said $8 a step. Maybe the sustaining price is $5, and then like for folks who need a little bit lower, it's closer to 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know if I have a direct answer to that. It's such a cool idea. I don't know exactly how it would get supported, funded.
Yeah.
But like, you know, in an ideal world, I would support that. Yeah.
I think something like kind of, you brought up a little bit in your comments about for-profit and like not-for-profit organizations, kind of shared values. And like, as someone who's worked in like, you know, for-profit farming and now was working for conservation district, I think something that nonprofit or like not entirely for-profit organizations have to be careful of is not like undercutting people who are trying to make their livelihood. So, you know, like that tension between like having a price that the market will bear and that is fair and that gets trees out on the landscape, but also not making it where it's a situation where I'm like, okay, well, all my time is paid for by a grant. We have our land for free, so I'm just kind of like cut the bottom out of the market, just give away these trees. I know I don't have like an answer, but that's something
Yeah,
that's on that.
one of the issues is that some of the funders have a price cap on the trees, and so that it can't float a bit according to what the market bears, personally. Although, again, we're, really working with those funders to explain why they should raise that cap or pay for local trees.
And my comment is related to that, like from the funding space. I think this is only my second time to this annual meeting, and so I really appreciate it and learn a lot. But like, it seems like there's this perception of what a cost per stem should be, and sometimes there's like this visceral reaction when an applicant has come in with X dollars per stem and what it should be, and just listening to this conversation, others, and appreciating all the different embedded costs. Like, I think along the lines of what you're saying is the opportunity and need for education of funders and reviewers. And so like, maybe there can be like the analysis of the true cost through the software and like an economic analysis, but also maybe just in proposals, like including more narrative on what that cost covers and what it doesn't, and like collectively, if somebody's coming in with a higher cost, then there can be kind of, learning over time about why you might see so much variation.
I'll just put a plug in. Both the Intervale Center and my organization are business planners that are funded through the Farm Viability Program. And we can get contract funding to develop a cost of production for any farm that wants to develop a cost of production for their product. And that includes nurseries. And the more of that data we have out there, the stronger that case is for a higher per stem price. Reach out to me or the Intervale Center or the Farm Viability Program, which is based in Montpelier. I am a contractor with the Farm Viability Program. I'm with the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that, I think that if we all, like, I don't know if a lot of new nurseries are already doing cost of production or not, but, like if at the end of, my second year, I come up with my cost of production number and it's comparing to like somebody else's, like trying to figure out like, how to keep those numbers down collectively, you know what I mean? Like if someone has a really high cost of production and someone else has low one, like what are the differences between the practices, and like how can we like figure that out together?
Let's figure it out this year. Talk about it next year.
We're a little bit after 2:30. There's anything.
I don't know. I think it's great to share the space with you all and, stay in touch as we get towards the growing season and, any way that we can support your operations and getting more trees in the ground.
Refrigeration space.
Oh, yeah, if you need refrigeration space. I don't know if we got it. Are we gonna break and then?
Yeah, there'll be a 15-minute break and then be back in here.